which is Morgan Farrier, right? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
Hello.
You're also in Madhu's team or have been recent USC graduate, right?
I'm hijacking the conference, Nicholas, but I think Morgan is going to present an a synopsis of the different concepts that were presented in the class. So that's how we framed these slides. Go for it, Morgan.
Yep. Floor is yours.
Yes, yeah. I'll present my lecture. All right. So I was part of Madhu's class, and this was my concept that I created for lunar lava tubes. We called it SHIRE, Space Habitation and Interior for Robotic Exploration. And so basically, I was thinking, imagine that you're an astronaut and you've just landed on the moon and you now want to create a city inside a lava tube. Now this lava tube that I have in the photo is an Earth one. The ones on the moon would likely be much larger. But there's still the question of, okay, from the very beginning, how do we set up a city that would utilize the space the best? Like your goal is to get here. How do we get here? So one of the things is that urban planning from the very beginning is very important. And you'll want to try to utilize the space as best as you can. And one of the ways to do that is to try to get as much infrastructure as you can up on the ceiling so that the floor is open for walkways and for homes. And so to even get there, we're going to have to survey the ceilings and the walls of the lunar lava tube. There's already been some robots concepts that have been designed to try to enter into and survey lunar lava tubes. One is Lassie, which would be crawling along the bottom. Another is Moondiver, which would essentially rappel down the side of the lunar lava tube. But we haven't had too many. There's an unfilled niche for robots that would climb along the ceiling or climb along the walls. So this is how we created the SHIRE concept. But first, there needs to be a way to be able to actually enter the lava tube. And to do that, we created the lunar mat concept, which this concept would actually be able to apply to any of the other robot concepts. So this would have a wider application than just the SHIRE mission. And once a lunar mat has been deployed to basically create I will talk more about why we're doing this, but to create a place so that the robot can be deployed without causing an avalanche. Then a JPL concept that I'm borrowing called Lemur could down climb, survey the rock quality, and then finally Eli, which is a concept that we created, would go along the ceiling by bolting and as a technology demonstration to show that bolting would be possible for the lunar lava tubes. And then they could, and that way we could show that, yes, it would be possible to put infrastructure on the ceiling of the lunar lava tubes. They would be able to structurally handle having that. So some things to note is that our design case is Mare Tranquillitatis, which is a large crater that exists near the equator of the moon. And that was chosen because it's much easier in terms of orbital trajectory to get to the equator region. And also Mare Tranquillitatis is one of the largest craters that we know of on the moon. Additionally, there's some crater topology to be aware of. So there's a funnel at the top of the crater about 62 meters long that has a high risk of avalanche because it's a bunch of loose regolith, and if you dug a wheel into it, it could displace the matter and cause an avalanche. Additionally, we believe it's about 80 meters deep to the top of the rim, and the void height is potentially 25 meters. It might go much deeper once you get beyond the initial hole. And also because there's been a paper done by Horvath that shows that the temperature inside the crater, or the most recent data shows the temperature inside the crater may actually be close to room temperature and would be steady. And that's good because that reduces the amount of, it increases what materials we can use and reduces the amount of heating and that you would need for a robot. Additionally, the rock is basalt, and while we don't completely know how basalt would form under in a vacuum situation, we do have examples on Earth of basalt being bolted into, and also because it's volcanic rock, it likely will have some cracks in it because it contracts as the lava cools, and that's not really that's not a air dependent thing. That's just the nature of heating of rock. So first to talk about the lunar mat. And yes, that is a picture of a slip and slide that I've repurposed for this. The entry conops for the lunar mat, essentially we would want to place a mat over that funnel region because the funnel is below what's called the angle of repose, which is the angle needed so that matter can sit on it and not automatically cause an avalanche. But if you dug into it, then it could displace material and then cause an avalanche. And so by resting a mat on it, you would prevent an avalanche from occurring. And so this mat you'd be able to roll a robot on it. It would have a low friction tether groove so that the tether that you have the robot attached to could, rest well in there, and then a hook to anchor it in. And additionally, the rims, if needed to keep regolith from getting onto the mat and contaminating the robot, you could inflate just the rims, again, like you would on a slip and slide, to prevent regolith from drifting onto the mat if that became necessary. So for how this mat would get deployed, there's actually something called a vacuum bazooka that they've done tests on. Essentially, it's if you have a tube and you suck out all the air and have like a very thin cover on one edge, they have then punctured one edge of it with a ping pong ball inside of it, and that ping pong ball shot out the other end at like 600 miles per hour. And that was just with puncturing it with 1 atmosphere amount of pressure on the other end, and that's because the inside of it has a vacuum. Well, on the moon, the tube's naturally going to have a vacuum because the moon does not have an atmosphere. And so you could get a projectile that would be able to launch out and unroll or you could have a pneumatically fired projectile that is able to launch out and unroll the mat behind it, just using the leftover cold gas from your lander. We have air rifles that are able to pressurize up to 3,400 psi. I don't think we would even need it to be that pressurized, because again, the pressure differential from vacuum to even just 1 atmosphere creates a very fast projectile. And so one note is that I have a front view here. Instead of being a tube, it would have to be kind of an oblong shaped thing to be able to launch out the entire mat. And then so that mat would then go and rest past the lip of the funnel of the tube. Now, as I mentioned, we are reusing the cold gas from a lander. So how do we get a lander to be right at the edge of the lava tube when we only have the ability to get the lander to land within dozens of meters of the lava tube? I'm still doing trades on this, but I have some ideas. One would be to have it land on treads instead of struts because that's a little bit more stable. Problem is that you'd need an easy path to the pit, which we might not have. You could also have the lander deploy wheels, or if that turns out this would be infeasible, then the lander could just transfer the cold gas to a surface rover. Just real quick, there's the Moondiver mission had already designed a tether that has communication and power lines inside a tether and was shown to be able to carry 122 kilogram robot. And it had about 5.4 kilonewton load rating, which is low on the low end for Earth. They've with the climbing community, you have people that are using ropes to take pretty long falls on them. Be low for Earth, but for the moon, 5.4 kilonewtons is perfectly fine for a load. So now to the robots that we would be using for this mission. First is Lemur 3, which was actually designed by JPL. Basically, it uses microspine grippers to crawl up a rough surface, and it has LiDAR to make foot placements, which is great because we would want to use LiDAR to survey the rock anyways. However, there's some issues in that during testing, they've been offloading some of the weight of the rover to try to simulate moon gravity, but they've been doing that using like a top rope tether. And the problem with that is that would change climbing dynamics. You now have an upward force that's actively like holding you to the wall. And so once the robot got to the moon and tried to climb like into the cave, and so it no longer had that upward force, it would probably have issues doing so. And so there's some alternatives that people tried to make. This was the ReachBot. Its first generation was the same sort of microspine thing, but as you can see, like they actively had to support it with a beam. And then their second generation had this like booms that reached out across the width of a pit, which is great for applications like Mars, which is what this was designed for. Not so great for Mare Tranquillitatis because we're talking about a 100-meter wide pit, so you would not be able to get booms that are long enough for that. So here's some of my, proposed updates to Lemur. One would be to add a fifth arm that all you need is like a 3-pincer grip that could place what we call trad gear. Basically, and there's a photo up on the left right. This is what climbers will use to place safety equipment into the wall, so that if they fall, they will be caught by the rope, they'll be fine. And so this way, Lemur would be able to go inside the cave of the pit and not have that upward force. It probably will have trouble climbing at first because it hadn't learned how to do that. But that's fine because it'll be able to take falls and be fine because it will have safety gear like cams. Forward, and then for people who are kind of struggling to visualize what I'm talking about here, here's a ConOps. Basically, Lemur will get deployed across the map and then start placing cams, climbing down the wall, and then it will be able to climb across the wall of the pit once it gets down the entrance. So the second robot, and that Lemur is there to survey the rock, and so we can get an initial estimate of like, okay, is this rock structurally sound? Can it, and also just get other scientific data to, they're very interested in looking at the geological properties of the rock. After that, Eli can be deployed. And essentially this would be a robot that would swing and then pull itself firm with motors that can keep tension and then drill into the rock, and then it would keep repeating that motion. And this would be a demonstration that bolting is possible, and also demonstration of the robot itself, because this robot could in the future be updated to actually be able to place infrastructure on the ceiling so that human astronauts wouldn't have to do that. So here's some proof of concepts. The Earth, we have a big climbing community on Earth that will place bolts into rocks and take falls on them and climb on them. And the current standard practice is to use about a 2.5 kilogram hammer rotary drill. And these are the bolts that they use for basalt specifically. So the robot would have, pretty hefty drills on its hands, but it's within reason of the, axle, which is another robot that was meant for rappelling here, was 122 kilograms. So we should be able to maintain around within that range of weight. Additionally, we do want to be careful of, there is a potential danger zone of right when the pit wall turns into the lunar lava or the lava tube cavern of rockfall. Now we can assume that any really loose stuff has probably already been shaken down because of in the past millions of years of moonquakes and thermal cycles. But Eli, because it's a hammer rotary drill, we can also just tap the rock at first to see like, okay, is this stable, and then drill. And additionally, like it's better to check out that you can bolt this stuff with a robot than with a human crew, because if it turns out that the rock isn't even capable of handling a drill, that tells us that we probably should not have humans inside Mare Tranquillitatis. So some other proof of concepts is a dragonfly drill that was done for Mars. This is for regolith. This is not for basalt, so it's not as strong, but it does show you that there's already been work done to alter drills to be able to handle extraterrestrial environments. And finally, for like the swinging motion, there was a robot called Tarzan, which would basically sling along a line. Now, an update we would need is we need a gearbox to be able to maintain tension in an upright position, so that it has time to drill through the rock. So it wouldn't just be like swinging and using momentum completely. And then here's just kind of an example of how it would work. So the bolt will get loaded into the drill house. Then the ceiling is drilled into. Then it presses with a hammering device to hammer the bolt in. And then the bolt through to the roof. Yes. Oh, sorry, Saba, I think you're not muted. So anyway, so then the trailing drill house is detached from the anchor and grabs the power line. And then the lidar suite. So this, the Eli robot would have a lidar to be able to take wide view lidar sweeps of the rock, which being on the ceiling would actually give it a higher level of, like a higher field of view. And then it will swing around and then repeat. So anyway, this was the concept that we created. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Morgan. And thank you to Will too. I thought both of them. I think you worked on the project. You added some slides, huh? Am I right to think that, Morgan?
Yes, there was a few slides that I added from when I originally.
That goes for Will too, and I'm sure Frida has a hand up. Frida, go for it.
Eventually, when we want to have human space habitations, you're probably going to have a seal on the front door, which I think your pictures showed. I imagine you may have to have a seal on the back door. How many openings, how many places for leakage may occur if we're trying to make a human habitation within these tunnels?
So my design was mostly just for beginning to test like the capability of putting things on the Earth. I think you're probably referring to the AI generated photo I had of like the homes. And yes, yeah. So there's several different concept designs of either, each little home has its own ceiling, but yes, obviously, if you're going to try to pressurize the entire tube, you would need to make sure that that's sealed from the outside.
Have we looked at some of the ones that we have on Earth? I've been in a few, and I really didn't pay a lot of attention to the complexity. I mean, it's not just a tube that has brought lava from one place to another, but there are side pockets. So how much have we examined these things on Earth?
Yeah, I haven't looked that far into it. Yeah, again, my project was just looking at the very like early concept of how do we start to survey this thing to prepare for a lunar habitation. I was not looking into the habitations themselves, but yeah.
Yeah, but Frida, that's an interesting question because people think that that most Earthlings, Earth dwellers, live on the surface. But the fact is, there are many townships all over the world. Australia has some, Turkey has many, India has several, China has several underground dwellings, and it's an important question to ask, particularly in this time when we are going into what I would think is an energy crunch, and
Yes.
underground dwellings are about 90% more thermally efficient than surface habitats, um, for fundamental thermodynamics reasons.
Well, it's certainly thought that primitive societies lived in caves.
Well, we got to change that, Frida.
Well, I mean, we had to go through the stage of being primitive before we could get advanced. But I mean, the idea of living in caves isn't new.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have incredibly beautiful subways in all the metropolises, and all of them are extremely efficient thermally. And when you have snow upon the DC surface, all you need is take the escalator down to the subway, and you're comfortable. Anyway, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Oh, there's another question from Chris
Mm.
Morgan. It says,
Oh yeah, so the based on drilling on Earth basalt, how many bolts could be drilled and placed with the battery pack on the 2.5 kilogram unit? That's a good question. I have not looked into that. The biggest limiting factor actually wouldn't be the power. It would be the fact that we physically have to hold bolts into the arm of the Eli robot. So I'm looking at, let's zoom around 20. But yeah, so that is something for me to look at the power constraints. But I think the biggest constraint would be like the amount of bolts that you can fit into the arms of the robot, not necessarily the power.
let's call the bolts bangles.
Yes.
All right, good question.
Good. Any more questions?
The class, Nicholas,
Yeah.
is actually asking our participants to just provide an idea, a concept. And we are not asking for secondary details or probing deeper into the engineering possibilities. And all
Okay.
of those happen later on. And the dragon waits for you. But our plan is to throw out as many ideas as possible in a 15-week class. It's
Yeah.
what we call pre-formulation documents. That is, hey, elevator pitch. Hey, I got this idea. What do I do with it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, fair enough. But just then it's good to have a bunch of interested questions thrown at you, I think. So it is not criticism that we're asking questions that you can't answer. It's more of a
For
testament that
instance,
it's a good idea that it's worth asking questions about.
yeah, for instance, Will did an incredible job, and many of them will have pointed questions at him. But then that becomes a pre-proposal and and I would call it a engineering a concept proposal. That'll be $10 million.
Yeah, yep, exactly. There are a couple more comments now
Oh, I see that. Yeah.
Sounds like a job for inefficient microwave power transmission.
Okay.
I guess you can't drill with microwaves. Yeah. And one say, great presentation, Morgan. I think there's a lot of capabilities for permanent bolts to assist future missions. Maybe they could have reflectors on them to help reusability. Oh, that you have already answered that, Morgan. Good.
Yes, yeah, I already put that. Yeah, no, that actually I did not think about that, and that is like, yeah, putting reflectors on them so that you could then hook things up later
Yeah.
on would be great. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Keep them. It's the power transmission is to power the drill rather than to make a hole. Okay. Yep. That sounds easier to do, I think. Not having worked with that. Do you have an opinion, Madhu, or Morgan, for that matter?
Oh well, I mean, there are lots of things you could do once you can once you can do permanent bolts. I mean, if some of you like rock climbing, I don't rock climb anymore, but I love to watch them drill holes into basalt and anchor. And I know that Morgan likes to go rock climbing. It's you can secure bolts very nicely, and it could be an exercise to see what you could do with these anchors.
I'll have a quick question for you, Morgan, and that's what is the next the most important next step?
Yeah, I mean, I think the next step would be, because I still have not settled on like how to make, whether to just have the lander be on the edge and then have to design something so that the lander can actually get to the edge, or to have it, have a third surface spot that it transfers to that already has Eli and Lemur on it. So that would be the next step. And then I think, yeah, so on the power of the drill thing, one of the reasons of having a tether would be because you would be having a power line and a communication line through that. So you could actually have siphon power off from the lander, which itself would have solar panels. So you would have extra power generation to be able to power the drill for a longer term. Yeah.
Yep, you don't have to carry the batteries.
Yes, yeah, and that would decrease weight too. Yeah.
Yep, good.